When the clock strikes midnight, the true architects of fear awaken. We venture into their workshops and studios where nightmares are composed and summoned. This is Working the Fright Shift.
Clock into Working the Fright Shift, the gateway between imagination and fear, with your host, Ted Doherty.
Hey everybody, I'm Ted Doherty, your host. Welcome to Working the Fright Shift, where every eerie creak tells a story and every draft carries a whisper. And sometimes those whispers swell into something far more haunting. Tonight, that haunting takes the shape of music, crafted by two masters of the macabre, Edward Douglas and Gavin Goska of the legendary Midnight Syndicate. But before we open that door and step into their world, let's examine the foundation of fear in this week's Horror Blueprint.
The Horror Blueprint, the art behind the fear.
Tonight, we are grinding into one of the most shocking, brilliant, and influential horror films ever made. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Released in 1974, this movie didn't just terrify audiences, it rewrote the rules of horror storytelling. The seed of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was planted in the mind of director Tobe Hooper during a crowded Christmas shopping trip in 1972. Overwhelmed by the chaos, he imagined cutting through the crowd with a chainsaw. That dark fantasy became the spark for Leatherface. Hooper teamed with Kim Henkel, and together they wrote the first draft, originally titled Head Cheese. They drew inspiration from real-life killers like Ed Gein, infamous for making masks and furniture out of human skin. To start with, Hooper and Henkel had almost no money. They worked with three budget scenarios: $60,000, $40,000, or a desperate $25,000 black and white version. Eventually, they scrapped together about $100,000. Casting was local. Marilyn Burns played Sally Hardesty, the final girl. Paul A. Partain embodied Franklin, her wheelchair-bound brother. Edwin Neal was the hitchhiker, and Jim Sydow became the cook. And, of course, Gunnar Hansen brought Leatherface to life. From what I researched, Gunnar Hansen wore 3-inch lifts to make Leatherface tower at nearly 6'7". And John Larroquette, who narrated the opening text crawl, yes, John Larroquette from Night Court fame, was paid with a single marijuana joint. And when it came to filming, the Texas summer was brutal. Temperatures soared to 115 degrees inside the farmhouse. The set was reportedly dressed with real animal carcasses, bones, and rotting meat. And on top of that rank, the cast wore the same costumes every day for continuity without even washing them. And even while wearing the same clothes with all that grime, Marilyn Burns endured real injuries, including cuts and bruises during filming. Sounds fun, right? Despite the misery, the raw realism became the film's strength. As Hooper said, psychologically, the idea was that the movie would enter your mind the way music does. When it premiered in 1974, audiences were stunned. Some theaters banned it. Critics called it sick crap. Yet others, like famed critic Rex Reed, urged people to run, not walk, to see it. And I think that's part of this whole thing, right? The way it's filmed. That washed out 70s orange and red tint, the acting. It felt like this was a real thing, like something we weren't supposed to be watching. It just felt real, and it stuck with people. It grossed over $30 million on that shoestring budget. It was later preserved in the National Film Registry in 2024 as culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. Beyond its release and basic impact on the public, And along with Black Christmas, this film is widely credited as birthing the slasher blueprint. A masked killer, power tools as weapons, isolated victims, and the final girl trope. And speaking of the power tools, only one person in the original film is shown being killed with a chainsaw. And even though it's filled with realistic horror, Stephen King said, "I would happily testify to its redeeming social merit in any court in the country." Its influence can be seen in Halloween, Friday the 13th, and countless others. Leatherface became an absolute horror icon, the Mount Rushmore of horror icons, alongside Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, and Freddy Krueger. Some people put Pinhead and Chucky up there, but those are discussions for another time. But let's talk about what came after the original, because the legacy didn't just stop in 1974. It grew, it twisted, sometimes stumbled, but it always left a mark. In 1986, Tobe Hooper himself returned with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. This time, he leaned hard into black comedy and outrageous gore. Audiences didn't know what to make of it at first, but over time it became a cult favorite with Dennis Hopper and the awesome Bill Moseley. By 1990, we got Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. It introduced a young Viggo Mortensen, but the film didn't do very well commercially. Then came Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation in 1995, starring Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger before they were household names. The movie was kind of bizarre, but I think it's remembered for its strange satire and those breakout performances. We fast forward to 2003, and the franchise was reborn with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake starring Jessica Biel. This gritty reboot reignited the series and was a box office success. The momentum carried into 2006 with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Beginning, a brutal prequel exploring Leatherface's origins. In 2013, Texas Chainsaw 3D arrived, marketed as a direct sequel to the 1974 original, and fans were divided. Some loved the campy tone, others felt it betrayed the raw terror of the first film. 2017 brought Leatherface, a prequel focusing on the killer's teenage years. It intrigued some with backstory, but was largely rejected along with negative reviews. And most recently, in 2022, Netflix released Texas Chainsaw Massacre, a legacy sequel set decades later. It was compelling for its modern relevance, but criticized for shallow characters and over-reliance on nostalgia. But Leatherface, he didn't just stay on screen, he stalked theme parks too. At Universal Studios' Halloween Horror Nights, Leatherface has appeared multiple times throughout the years. More recently, in 2021, guests relived iconic scenes from the 1974 film in a terrifying maze, and in 2024, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Legacy of Leatherface celebrated the franchise's 50th anniversary, showcasing moments from across all 9 films. Meanwhile, Six Flags Fright Fest Great Adventure in New Jersey and over Texas joined the fun in 2024 with mazes based on the Netflix film and returned in 2025. They were generally well received. Aside from the movies and theme park attractions, the franchise has inspired comic books, video games, and tons of merch over the years. And despite all that popularity, the original film was banned in 11 countries, some all the way up to the early 2000s. With all that in mind, it's safe to say the Texas Chainsaw Massacre still haunts us after all these years. Why are they still making sequels and theme park attractions about it? Well, maybe because it feels real. It's not about supernatural monsters. It's about human cruelty, isolation, and a lot of experts and historians feel the original film represents the collapse of the American dream. As director Wes Craven once said, the film looked like someone had stolen a camera and started killing people. That raw authenticity is why I think it endures. It seriously shook audiences, reshaped horror, and forced society to confront its darkest fears. Leatherface isn't just a killer, and I've said it time and again with many of these horror subjects throughout this entire podcast series. He is a mirror reflecting the anxieties of his time. And that's why I believe, after all these years, over 5 decades, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remains the ultimate horror blueprint. Now that we've wrapped up this week's horror blueprint, it's time to turn our attention to the people who have defined the sound of Halloween for an entire generation. Tonight, I'm joined by 2 legends whose music has echoed through countless fog-filled corridors, theme parks, and haunted attractions for nearly 3 decades. Gavin Goska and Edward Douglas of Midnight Syndicate have crafted more than 20 albums since forming the project in 1996, each one expanding the sonic universe of horror, fantasy, and dark imagination. Their work has been heard in haunts around the world, from home haunts to industry giants like Universal Studios' Halloween Horror Nights, Knott's Scary Farm, and countless independent attractions that rely on their soundscapes to set the tone of terror. Their influence grew so profoundly that in 2014 they brought their world to life on stage with Midnight Syndicate live at Cedar Point's Halloweekends, merging theatrical storytelling with their iconic music in a way that redefined what a live horror soundtrack experience could be. Very, very few artists have shaped the haunt industry as deeply or as consistently as these 2. So let's step into the shadows and talk about how Midnight Syndicate became a true heartbeat of Halloween.
Fear Architects, crafting worlds of terror.
Welcome to Working the Fright Shift, Gavin and Edward. Midnight Syndicate, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. How are you guys doing?
Good.
Doing great.
Great. Well, like I said, I appreciate you taking time out of your day to spend a little time with us to talk about some fun haunt stuff. So I have questions for you. Are you ready?
Bring it on.
Okay. Well, when you think back to your childhood Halloweens, what were some of the sights or the sounds or maybe the traditions that first planted the seeds for your love of the macabre?
Oh man, for me, I started watching horror movies fairly young. I remember seeing the original Salem's Lot, and I was just fascinated by it. And then that kind of led to other things. I got into Dungeons and Dragons, the other role-playing game, and I still don't understand why they were willing to do this, but my parents were generous enough to allow me to build these like makeshift little home haunts in my basement. So I would tie that into a Dungeons game that we would have every Halloween that was themed for horror. So my players would come through this, like, it was made with like sheets and drum stands and stuff. And then they'd come out into the central area where I'd be already the dungeon master. And it was cool. It was good stuff.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Edward, what about you?
For me early on, it was definitely getting those records out of the library, those sound effects records and ghost stories and ghost story books and Universal monster books from the library. But I think that Disney's Haunted Mansion, the one in Orlando, both of them I got to experience young, probably had a fairly significant impact on me. I think that transferred over. You were asking about like Halloween time. I think one of the cool things I remember about Halloween was that I loved so much was just walking up and down the streets and looking at the houses that were decorated, just absorbing that vibe, that whole thing, and being terrified of the houses where the people were sitting out in front because you knew they were going to try and scare you or they do something or they did a lighting special. Just the anticipation, what you build in your head. That's what I remember most about Halloween, just like that thrill of just going house to house and seeing everything decorated and all that.
Oh, I love it. And Gavin, I'm a huge fan of the original Salem's Lot movie. I love the book. So, speaking of that kind of stuff, the horror films of the 70s, 80s, They had very distinct musical identities. Were there any particular scores or maybe even composers in general who helped shape your early understanding of atmosphere and tension?
Yeah, I mean the original Halloween, John Carpenter, classic. I mean, just how he could do so much with so little in terms of what's involved in that score. I mean, there's not much to it, by like when you're thinking about orchestrations and stuff. But it was super, super effective. And even like the Nightmare on Elm Street and stuff, a lot of those classic, 80s movies and stuff, the soundtracks were always just so representative of the vibe of the movie.
Yeah, yeah. John Carpenter. The more I go on, I realize just how big of an impact he had on me. Yeah, of course, Halloween, but all of his like soundtracks, like The Fog, and just so much of what he was able to do, I truly loved. But for me, it's also James Horner and what he did with the Aliens soundtrack, and Jerry Goldsmith and what he did with things like Omen and Alien. Just Star Trek the movie. Those are two composers that had a huge influence in my writing for Midnight Syndicate. I think John Williams too, even though not very dark, but definitely there are moments that he's capable of producing, and certainly his just penchant for writing these themes that are so amazing. I'd like to say definitely inspired me.
Sure. Now, before Midnight Syndicate officially formed in 1996 is what my notes say. So am I right about that? 1996?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, good. Now, what did each of your musical journeys look like before that formed? Where did you study composition? What drew you to classical, orchestral storytelling rather than maybe more traditional, like regular band rock formats?
I started on the Hammond organ basically when I was, I think, 7 years old. And then that kind of led into other instruments from there. When I got into high school, I picked up drums and bass and things. But I started just kind of noodling around on some keyboards in my teens and started kind of writing these sort of experimental kind of, I was very much into like new age music at the time, that kind of expansive, like really synth heavy, longer compositions and stuff. So that's kind of where I got my start with writing. And then, through later years, I got into different bands. I played in kind of a little bit of everything over the years in terms of bands and stuff. But, the instrumental side of things was, I guess, it's always been a focus for me at least.
I started on guitar and then moved to organ and bass guitar. And I played in rock bands throughout like high school and then into college. I think that when I was in college, I got my first 4-track, and that's the first time I started writing original music. We were limited by technology back then. It was really hard to record anything remotely like what you're envisioning in your mind. But I do remember some of those 4-track recordings where I just layered like myself playing organ and myself playing the drums, like just hack and, putting together these little songs that, would be later the basis for Midnight Syndicate. Just lacking the technology, I think, to see it all the way through. Towards the latter half of my college career, I was really into theater and film, and so I would score the films that I was doing in college. And I think that also was really important in my development, and also just working in the radio station. I was a DJ for about 13 years, and just working with sound effects and actually listening to the radio dramas that they would play on the station, and just seeing how they use sound effects and mixed it with the music to enhance the whole experience. I think just probably rubbed off on me. And so taking all that just kind of led me to where I was in 96, the rock bands, and then scoring these films that I did in college and then right out of college. And then just the sound effects, working in sound design and stuff like that, not only for the movies, but also just what came from me from working in radio for a little bit.
Fascinating. I love it. Now, generally speaking, how did the two of you connect and meet and think, hey, we should do this together? We've got something here.
I'll start with this one,
Okay.
Gavin, because I think I'll say this. For me, like Gavin was the first person when I built my first studio, when I was ready to take a step up from that 4-track and really start getting into like the digital equipment, just kind of build out the studio, I went to Soja's Music, and that's where I met Gavin. And I will say, from the minute I met him, I was like, oh my God. He's like, he was so amazing. He could make the cheapest Casio at Soja's sound like friggin' like amazing. Like, oh my God, that's the best piece of equipment I've ever seen and heard in my life. So I'll be honest, I was in awe of Gavin from when I met him initially, not only his technical knowledge, but just his ability to perform and play, and just, and we got along really well, like immediately. And so, yes, I know that when I first met him, I was like it would be amazing to work with him someday. But actually, when I first met him, I didn't even think that would be a possibility, because he was so out of my league. That's what I felt, early on. So what I did, is the first Midnight Syndicate album was kind of like was more like a solo project. I worked with a lot of other artists, but I really directed it, and really was the primary creative force behind it. And I remember taking a first draft of that album to Gavin to get his feedback and see what he thought of it. And then, of course, when we did live shows to promote that first album, I asked him to come on out and see what he thought of it and everything like that, just to kind of rope him in and see if he liked what we were doing.
Gavin, how do you remember it?
That's pretty accurate. Well, I mean, I can't speak for the complimentary side of what you just said, but no, yeah, it was a customer of mine for years and stuff. We were talking, in between, like, you buying equipment and stuff, and he told me about the whole thing with Midnight Syndicate and everything. And, I went out to that first multimedia show just, to kind of see what it was about and to kind of support him and everything. And I'm like, wow, this is, there's a lot of stuff here that I can really get into and stuff. And, we had the mutual love of horror and everything. So after the show, I said, hey, if you ever want to work together, like, maybe we can work on something. I mean, like, I see a lot of common ideas and stuff here. And it was very, very short amount of time after that he gave me a call and said, hey, there's this Born of the Night thing coming up. And I said, yeah, no, sign me on, just based on the idea. Like, there was nothing out there like it at the time. This whole idea of doing something that was just designed to create an atmosphere for Halloween. You had all the old style, like the sound effects tapes and albums and stuff. And then, of course, like the Monster Mash compilations. But this was very different. It was very, like, atmospheric. And I'm like, oh, that's, yes,
Once you form, you're starting to put stuff out. How did you initially spread the word? Because, like you said, Gavin, this wasn't really out there for people, and it reached the haunt community, but this was before social media the way we know it nowadays. So it's not like you didn't have the YouTubes and everything that you have nowadays. How did you spread the word and really educate the haunt community on what this is? And this is something that can help you, haunters, create atmosphere for your events.
Yeah, it was a very different world back then. But I think one of the biggest things was doing our first the trade show at Trans World in Chicago. That was a key move to just get the music out there to like a captive audience and kind of show them what we were doing and everything.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, Gavin, you nailed it. I mean, Trans World was huge for us. That's the trade show. But yeah, boy, how different it was back then. We knew we had something that professional haunted houses and amusement parks were going to want, because there's just, I know we say it, but there really was nothing like Midnight Syndicate out in 1998.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, there was just nothing quite, where it was mostly music, mostly orchestral music, with the sound effects mixed in, but the sound effects were very secondary, and it's just about creating an atmosphere. And we saw the response from haunters immediately, and we're like, okay, so now we know we have something here. Then I think it was about putting on the business hat and going out there and literally taking the product to people. And back then, it meant literally taking the product to people, whether it was Gavin and I delivering CDs to stores, or I went to Universal Studios there and met with the entertainment people there, going to Cedar Point and just reaching out over phone calls with these people and saying, hey, we have something here. Can I just send you the CD? See if it's something you like. It was literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cold calls and attending trade shows and just more cold calls and just literally just putting yourself out there. But back then, internet was nothing like it is today. And it was just a lot of pounding the pavement for years.
Yeah, it sounds crazy like that we were actually literally getting in our cars and hand delivering, CDs to like different stores and stuff. But the cool part about that is you got to make a connection with the buyers and the managers of these stores and ask them like, hey, how's it doing for you? What's the feedback you're getting? And then we can kind of use that to build on.
And the same thing goes for haunted houses. We would go back to the trade shows and we would meet them and we'd say, what do you think? And stuff. And going to the amusement parks and say, what do you think? What do you think of these? What do you think of these? Where could we go with this? Do you have any, what's some feedback? Just building those relationships and listening to what people had to say and try and use that input.
Once you got it into people's hands, do you remember any kind of surreal moments when you started to hear your music played at these different events? Clearly, this is something that you love this genre. Here it is. Your art that you're making is now contributing to these worlds. Do you remember any special moments or times when it kind of hit you and dawned on you like, oh, wow, this is pretty darn cool?
For me, I mean, this might have been the first time I think that I heard our stuff played anywhere publicly, but we were in the car driving down to a haunt that we were kind of vending at and everything. And there's a local legend named Michael Stanley that used to be a DJ on our radio stations here and stuff. And he played one of the tracks off of Born of the Night, and we are both in the car listening to this at on this drive and stuff. And it was like, wow, that is wild, man. Like on a radio station that we both listened to, for regular rock, everyday listening and stuff. That was a trip.
Wow.
We'll never forget that moment. Absolutely not. And it's cool. We got to experience it together.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, going to Cedar Point, I mean, that is the park, and Geauga Lake. Those are two that are right near us. Going in there and hearing our music playing through the speakers at a park that you've literally grown up going to, that was huge. I think that going to Universal Studios and hearing the music and the ticket counter and then just going throughout the park and hearing it. Yeah, that was, I mean, the first time I was just like, that was amazing. I mean, those are parks that like not only you grew up going to, but they were like, oh my God, it's Universal, it's Disney. And I mean, these are iconic parks, and so that was good. And the cool little side thing is Disney's Haunted Mansion sold some Midnight Syndicate CDs for a couple of years. That was one of the coolest. That's a reality, like a oh my God moment, and then when your music's being sold outside of the Haunted Mansion, the whole thing that helped start the whole thing for you personally, that was a super insanely cool moment. I still have the CDs with the Disney's price tags on them.
That is where I bought my first Midnight Syndicate CD, was in front of the
No
Haunted
way!
Mansion. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Cool.
That's so cool.
Because I had never heard of you or anything, and I'm like, what is this? And it was a little weird because this is like clearly not like a Disney, because I grew up with the Haunted Mansion album and all that stuff. So, but this was not like there was no Mickey Mouse on the cover or anything. It's like, well, what is this? And I'm like, I have to get this. It was so cool. So I instantly
That's so awesome. That's where
cool.
that's so cool. Yeah, no, I am. Those are the things you don't forget. You never forget. Those are like the highlight.
You mentioned Cedar Point as your sort of home park. You began performing there for Halloweekends. And how did you begin translating cinematic, layered music into a live theatrical experience at a major Halloween theme park?
We had a lot of input and help from the park itself. Working with them had always been fantastic. Every year that we were there, we would get to reinvent the show and everything, and they would always give us some great input on like what would work maybe from a theme park perspective versus just an ordinary show and stuff. So it was very much a collaborative effort right from the beginning.
It was, and when Syndicate first started out, we talked about those live shows, the live show promoting that first album. What that was a multimedia show that mixed film and live action and lighting and theatrics. It was basically throwing everything that I had learned in film and theater and music together. And like I would score a movie that was playing while people watched it and added, so we did that in 98, and I'm thankful because obviously, Gavin, that's one of the things that helped, say, hey, I want to work with you. But that show didn't really, take off or anything like that. But what it did is it gave me a lot of experience in putting together a multimedia show. So when it came time to go to Cedar Point and say, this is what a Midnight Syndicate show could look like, and it would involve all these different elements, I had already done it before, so it wasn't so foreign to me. And between Gavin and I, we were able to come up with a good show concept, and then using the experience in film and theater, we were able to realize it and at least present it to Cedar Point in such a way they're like, oh yeah, we can do this. And as Gavin said, we can suggest one or two things, integrate that into the show and make it even better. And we did that first show in 2014. In a wonderful theater they had there. It was one of the greatest moments for me in Midnight Syndicate history. That first weekend when you came out, the show was really different, as you'd expect. It seems like everything we do is a little different, but like for an amusement park show, the Midnight Syndicate live show is very different. So the park was taking a chance on us, and we were putting ourselves out there. I mean, the show was really very much like a haunted house in a way.
One of the feedback we were getting after that, in fact, people were just caught off guard. They're like, I thought I was going to see like Snoopy on Ice and like singing and dancing. And
I thought I was going to receive to see like a rock and roll music with a horror theme, kind of like that's what typical amusement park fare would be. But that first night, hearing the audiences just erupt and then like meeting them afterwards and everything like that. Yeah, it doesn't, again, just another one of those like highlights in this journey. But I'll never forget that first weekend, because the response from everybody was great, and everybody won. Cedar Point won. We won. It was just wonderful. So
it was a big theater too. That was a former IMAX theater.
That's awesome.
So it was a huge, like soaring space. The stage we were on, it was like a 2-story set, and it's just really cool.
That's the first time we ever played out live as Midnight Syndicate. So we went from not playing out live for 17 years to playing out live and for like 1,000 people and stuff. Like it was cool.
Thank goodness you did it. I'm very happy that you did it. I know thousands of people that watched you do it, loved it. Now, switching gears a little bit, when we're talking about creating a new album, in general terms, what does the process for writing look like? Do you improvise together, trade themes back and forth, or do one of you maybe come in with a fully formed idea and you kind of riff on that as a foundation? What's that general process like?
We actually write mostly independently. I mean, there's been a few times, in fact, one of the Cedar Point tracks that we did, we wrote together. But most of the time, we're just kind of working on our own and sketching out ideas. And then we'll bring those ideas together and say, okay, what here seems to work, given like the theme, or the kind of world we're trying to create. That's always decided early on. And then we'll kind of whittle down that pool of ideas down to maybe, like a smaller amount and stuff, and then kind of develop them from there and get the arrangements going and see what direction they go in. But we're always in contact to make sure we're kind of going where we need to go with it. So we're not going way off into like left field or whatever.
I think we've always come up with a theme first. We kind of always have said, hey, I think this is what we should do. And then let's go for that. And then the whole process just starts just like Gavin said. As a matter of the time we're recording it, we're right in the middle of it right now. I put together a bunch of songs. We put them to Gavin for consideration. We talked about it. We've whittled it down to a smaller set, and now I'm actually right in the process of developing those songs right now as we and Gavin will be at another stage of the whole process too. But that's literally how we work it. And it's back and forth, and it's like just taking the input from each other and listening to it and trying to elevate the final product by doing that.
How exciting. Thank you. Now I have one lighthearted question. If you could time travel way back, Edward, you talked about going back to the old Tascam 4-track, all that. If you could hand your younger selves one piece of advice about building a creative career, it's such a niche genre, what would you tell them? And would they have listened?
Invest in Google would be that is what I would tell myself. Take just a little bit of money and throw it into
Right.
some stocks, a couple risky ones, and then some other stable ones. Now, I think when I look back, there's not many regrets. We really, for me, like we set out to do this, and then we worked just so hard to keep, there's never a point where we took our foot off the gas and just kept working so hard. So I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting to see where the industry goes with all the changes now for artists when it comes to making money, just making a living and stuff like that. It's going to be very interesting to see where this goes. So much has happened even in the last year and stuff like that. So it's going to be interesting. I think for I don't know. I think maybe not as much for the live and amusement parks as much. Things with live experiences, but when we talk about things like writing and drawing and music and stuff like that, it's going to be interesting to see where the future lies for working musicians and stuff, like working artists.
For me, I probably would have told my younger self, like, everything that you know right now, everything that you're used to and everything, don't get too used to it. Don't take it for granted. Because I don't think, and what you said about like what I've listened, I don't know if anybody would have been able to picture all the changes that happened. I mean, everything from moving away from physical media, all the technological developments that have happened since we started doing this and stuff. But that's probably what I would want to try to tell myself is like, everything's going to change. Literally all the business models, everything that you're used to, just don't get too attached to it.
That's good.
Be open-minded.
That's good, Gavin. That's really good. It is true. You have to, I mean, it took a little while sometimes to be able to adapt, willing to accept change. I think, I guess.
And fast changes too. It's not even like you've got, say, 5, 6, 7 years to get used to something. It was like boom, boom, boom,
Our first albums were released on cassette and CD. Cassette. We were releasing albums on cassette because the stores demanded it, because there's that many people using cassettes. Now you think of just like how many monumental changes have occurred since then, and MP3, .com and all that. I mean, just it's AI music was not on my bingo card 30 years ago. And yet, here we are with these massive changes and stuff like that.
Thank goodness we have you, Midnight Syndicate, your massive library from the past and the future, because you will continue to fuel those live experiences that we all love. So with that, I want to say, Gavin, Edward, thank you so much for working the Fright Shift. Huge thanks to Gavin and Edward for such a fun conversation. And to you listeners, I hope you enjoyed our talk as much as I did. And here's a little fun fact. Their work was used in a scare zone that I helped create at Cedar Point's Halloweekends a couple years back, named Banished. The music from the scare zone made its way onto the 25th anniversary Halloweekend soundtrack CD, which you can still find on their website at www.midnightsyndicate.com. And if you want to dive deeper into their world, head over to their website and explore their incredible library of albums. But now, let's step into the place where I revisit the moments that taught me how to blend history, emotion, creativity, and design into this wacky world of Halloween in Echoes of the Past.
Echoes of the Past. The origins of scare experiences.
I'm twisting my way into a topic that has shaped not only the theme park industry at large, but my own creative approach to Halloween attractions. So tonight, we're talking about dark rides. Now, before I get too deep, I should say, I know up front, this is just a brief overview. There's entire books, some absolutely excellent ones that exist out there. They have been written on the history of dark rides. So just think of this as a casual stroll through some of the highlights, the turning points, and the innovations that exist in the attractions we create today. So, hold tight, the safety bar's down, we're moving forward. So the basic idea, so that way we're all on the same page, a dark ride is a storytelling attraction where guests travel through a series of scenes in some sort of ride vehicle surrounded by controlled lighting, sound, visual effects. The dark in Dark Ride isn't really about the horror element, it's about the ability to control what the audience sees. So the darkness is kind of like the canvas. Theme park historian Scott Lucas once said, "Dark rides are the purest form of environmental storytelling. They guide your eyes, your ears, and your emotions." And I think that's exactly what makes them so enduring. These rides go back over a century, and their earliest forms, well, they weren't really scary at all. One of the first major dark ride genres was the Tunnel of Love, the classic courting ride where couples floated through dimly lit passages, often with gentle scenic vignettes. These popped up in the late 1800s and early 1900s, especially at places like Coney Island. But as American amusement culture evolved, so did the appetite for thrills. By the 1920s and 30s, we started seeing the rise of scary dark rides, sometimes called pretzel rides, named after the Pretzel Amusement Ride Company founded in 1928. They introduced the now iconic single-rail electric car that zigzagged through tight turns, sudden blasts of air, clattering noises, and glow-in-the-dark skeletons. Historian Todd James Pierce once described these early rides as controlled chaos in the dark, a funhouse on rails. They were simple, chaotic, and really popular. Why? Because they were cheap to build, easy to operate, and delivered a jolt of fun and adrenaline. In the United States, especially during the Great Depression, these rides offered escapism, a few minutes of thrills for a few cents. They became staples of boardwalks, traveling carnivals, and early amusement parks. And as the decades rolled on, dark rides became more elaborate. Parks experimented with themes like haunted houses, jungle adventures, space voyages. But even then, most of these rides were more like collections of scenes than cohesive stories. They were fun, but they weren't really narrative. But that all changed in 1955 when Disneyland opened its gates in Anaheim. And it didn't just introduce a new theme park, it introduced a new philosophy. Walt Disney believed attractions should tell stories, not just present scenes, not just offer thrills, but to tell stories. So Disneyland's opening day rides, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, Snow White's Adventures, Peter Pan's Flight, they did exactly that. They were based on beloved animated films, and they used the dark ride format to immerse guests inside these worlds. Theme park historian Bruce Gordon once said Disneyland didn't invent the dark ride, but it reinvented what a dark ride could be. And author David Younger added, Disney's dark rides weren't just attractions, they were narrative machines. And that's the key difference. Disneyland's dark rides had beginnings, middles, and ends. They had emotional beats based on their cartoons. They had recognizable characters. They had structure. This was revolutionary. And then came the two giants. Everything changed. Pirates of the Caribbean opened in 1967, and it was unlike anything the world had ever seen. It was long, it was detailed, it was atmospheric, it blended humor, danger, and spectacle in a way that felt cinematic. It proved that dark rides could be epic. Then, in 1969, the Haunted Mansion opened, the ultimate scary dark ride. It wasn't just eerie with ghosts, it was elegant, funny, mysterious, technologically groundbreaking. The Pepper's Ghost ballroom scene alone became a masterclass in illusion. Author Chef Bayham for you old schoolers, his early website was a huge inspiration of mine. But Jeff, he literally wrote a book on the mansion, once said, the Haunted Mansion isn't just a ride, it's a conversation between the living and the dead told through illusion. Those two attractions didn't just raise the bar. They rebuilt it. They showed that dark rides could be immersive worlds, not just sequences of scenes. They influenced so many major attractions that followed. And from there, the dark ride world exploded with innovation. A few of the biggies, again, this is just an overview. Indiana Jones Adventure, Temple of the Forbidden Eye, 1995, a fusion of dark ride storytelling and motion-based technology. 1994's the original Twilight Zone Tower of Terror, a narrative drop ride that used dark ride scenes to build tension. 1996 Jurassic Park The Ride, blending animatronics, water ride thrills, cinematic pacing. There's the Amazing Adventures of Spider-Man at Universal that opened in 1999. Groundbreaking mix of 3D media, physical sets, motion simulation. There's Radiator Springs Racers that opened in 2012, a love letter to classic dark rides with modern tech and emotional storytelling. There's Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey that opened in 2010, redefining what a hybrid dark ride could be. And even more recently, Disney's Rise of the Resistance and the Frankenstein Experiment at Epic Universe. These are all reminders that the dark ride is still evolving, still pushing boundaries. Industry scholar Martin Palicki said every major leap in themed entertainment can be traced back to a dark ride that dared to do something new. And I think he's right. The lineage is unmistakable. Let's talk about how all this influences the work I do in Halloween events. Dark rides taught me, and really taught a lot of us in themed entertainment, the importance of linear storytelling. Guests move at a constant pace, and a lot of the attractions I work on, they walk instead of go through a ride vehicle, but you can't stop them to explain things. You can't hand them a script. You have to tell the story visually through sound, through atmosphere, through pacing. For me, sometimes through monsters. But that's exactly what we do in walkthrough attractions. We're essentially creating a dark ride without the ride vehicle. A perfect example of this philosophy in action is the original dark ride maze at Knott's Scary Farm designed by my friend John Cook. For those of you who are unfamiliar, the premise I thought was brilliant. Guests explore an abandoned amusement park dark ride that has been taken over by creepy clown-like inhabitants who have made it their home, their sanctuary. And the maze doesn't come right out and tell you that. It shows you. You walk through faux dark ride scenes, complete with the track on the ground, stalled ride vehicles, those classic plywood flats painted like old-school scenic illusions. And then you slip backstage into the guts of the attraction, the workshop, the storage areas, the maintenance corridors, and eventually, well, you reach the lair of the inhabitants themselves. There's no long-winded exposition. There's no narrator explaining the plot to everybody. The story is self-evident. You're walking through an abandoned dark ride, but you're not alone. You are invading these creepy people's home. And that's a great example of visual storytelling in a haunted house. And that ties to the legacy of dark rides. Dark rides are more than entertainment, they're creators of emotion. They taught us how to guide a guest's heartbeat with nothing more than light, shadow, and timing. They taught us how to build worlds that feel alive, even when they're made out of plywood and paint. They taught us that story doesn't need paragraphs. Sometimes it only needs a single image in the dark. And maybe most importantly, they taught us that innovation doesn't come from technology alone. It comes from imagination, from the willingness to ask, what if? What if a boat drifted past singing pirates invading a town? What if ghosts could dance forever in a ballroom? What if a forgotten dark ride wasn't as abandoned as it seemed? Every time we create a new attraction, we're adding another chapter to a story that began over a century ago. A story written in darkness, but illuminated by creativity. Dark rides endure because they remind us of something essential. In the dark, anything is possible, especially in the echoes of the past. And just like that, the lights dim on another shift. Huge thanks to our fear architects, Gavin and Edward of the Midnight Syndicate. Within these stories is the blueprint of fear itself, how we face it, how it transforms us, how we create it, and sometimes how it sets us free. If you liked what you heard, do us a favor and tell a friend to tell a friend. Give us a good review, 5 stars, and help spread the word. Thanks for spending your nightmares with us. I'm your host, Ted Doherty, Beast Wishes, and until we meet again, it's officially time to clock out of Working the Fright Shift. Working the Fright Shift is written and produced by Ted Doherty. No portion of this recording may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written and express permission of the producer. All opinions expressed in this recording are solely those of the individuals and do not necessarily reflect the views of the producer or affiliates. For more details, visit www.workingthefrightshift.com. Copyright 2026 Ted Doherty. All rights reserved.